There's something morbidly fascinating about a criminal's last words. By definition, a death row prisoner has a better idea of when their time will come than the rest of us. They know when they'll make their final statement. Here we'll explore the haunting last words of criminals. Some criminal acts seem to come straight out of a monster movie. A person with no record of criminal activity seemingly out of the blue turns sadistic to the point of implausibility. At a glance, that's the story of Karla Faye Tucker. According to police reports, Tucker was out partying when she and her accomplice Danny Garrett decided the time was right to rob and intimidate 27-year-old Jerry Lynn Dean. Having stolen keys to Dean's apartment, they entered, and Karla Tucker took a pickaxe to his head and body 28 times, later telling friends she received a sensual thrill with every blow. Sentenced to death, Karla became a national media phenomenon, drawing interest with her charismatic persona and reported conversion to Christianity.
I'm so far removed from the person that I used to be out there.
The New York Times says there's an argument to be made that her sentencing even caused a dip in Texans' approval of the death penalty. In 1998, Tucker died by lethal injection, the first woman executed by the state of Texas in over 20 years. Depending on your point of view, her last statements were either reflective of her turn to religion or an ominous portent. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you. The 1920s were a grim period for Ireland. Civic strife and gruesome bloody civil war led to sweeping reforms like the Army Emergency Powers Resolution of September 1922. Among other things, it instituted martial law across the country, allowing trial by court-martial and made the possession of firearms by civilians an offense punishable by death. Robert Erskine Childers, meanwhile, was an Englishman, author, and soldier, a decorated Boer War and World War I veteran. It's unknown when exactly he became enamored with Irish nationalism, but he was passionate on the subject, smuggling weapons and even being accused of writing propaganda for the nationalist cause or the IRA during the war. A close eye was kept on Childers, and in November of 1922, his home was raided and he was arrested for possession of a revolver. Before being put to death by firing squad, he was reported to have shaken hands with his executioners and to have said, "Take a step or two forward, lads. It will be easier that way." In the pantheon of film and literature, you'd be hard-pressed to find a fictional criminal with a more cartoonishly abhorrent personality and lifestyle than the all-too-real Karl Panzram. According to his own writings, Panzram had killed at least 21 people by the end of his life, expressing no remorse. Writing about his crimes, including murder, robbery, and arson, he wrote, "For all of these things, I am not the least bit sorry. I have no conscience, so that does not worry me. I don't believe in man, God, nor devil. I hate the whole damned human race, including myself."
I think he was so full of hatred and with such a need, a compulsion to kill.
While he was never arrested for murder, Panzram garnered the death penalty when, while serving a 25 to life sentence in Leavenworth, he beat prison employee Robert Warnke to death with an iron bar, leaving the man's wife a widow and his son without a father. At his hanging on the 5th of September 1930, Karl Panzram kept true to form, spitting in the face of the man who put the bag over his head. Just before the execution commenced, he was asked if he had any last words. His response, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill 10 men while you're screwing around." To his last breath, John Arthur Spenkelink swore he was innocent in the killing of 45-year-old Joseph J. Zimenkiewicz in February of 1973. According to Spenkelink, he had picked up Zimenkiewicz hitchhiking, then accidentally shot him in an act of self-defense after Zimenkiewicz sexually assaulted him in a Tallahassee motel. According to prosecutors, however, Spenkelink waited until Zimenkiewicz was asleep, then shot him in the head and back and beat him with a hatchet. Spenkelink then skipped town with another hitchhiker, Frank Broom, and the two were arrested for suspicion of armed robbery in California a few days later. John Spenkelink made headlines when he became the first man executed in the state of Florida after a 10-year moratorium on government-sanctioned criminal executions.
I don't think there's anybody on death row now that does want to die.
His last words before being electrocuted mirrored his claims that he was only being put to death because he couldn't afford better court representation. Capital punishment, them without the capital get the punishment. For the uninitiated, Aileen Wuornos was the subject of the 2003 motion picture Monster, where she was played by Charlize Theron. Her life was a series of horrifying events. Her father died in prison while serving time for child molestation, and her mother left her to be raised by an alcoholic grandmother and an abusive grandfather. Adult life didn't treat her much better, and she had soon turned to prostitution and petty crime. Over the course of 12 months in 1989 and 1990, she killed 6 men, and after property taken from the victims was recovered from several pawn shops with Wuornos' fingerprints, she was apprehended and confessed to the crimes, claiming each of the men had attempted to assault her and that she was acting in self-defense. Then, in 2001, Wuornos experienced a change of heart, volunteering for the death penalty and saying keeping her alive would be a waste of taxpayer money. CNN quoted her as saying, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system."
I'm as guilty as can be, and and there's more.
Before being subjected to death by lethal injection, Aileen Wuornos gave one final message, as chilling as it was mysterious. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." A product of a time in American history when high-profile criminals were given nicknames like Dick Tracy villains, Barbara Bloody Babs Graham was a fascinating case. It's been noted by KCET she was something out of a noir detective story, a hypnotic beauty with a willingness to kill. As is often the case, the reality is a lot more tragic. Graham's mother, an unwed teenager, was sent to live at a reform school shortly after Barbara's birth, leaving Barbara to be raised in foster homes and orphanages. After an arrest for vagrancy as a teenager, Barbara was sent to the same school. She was released in 1939 at the age of 16, immediately married, and gave birth to her first child in 1940. A couple of divorces, a heroin dependency, and a remarkably pragmatic approach to a career in prostitution later, Graham was implicated in the death of a Burbank woman named Mabel Monahan during a botched robbery. While the evidence against her was largely circumstantial and dependent on the testimony of an accomplice turned state's witness, Graham was sentenced to death. After being strapped into the gas chamber, Barbara was reportedly told by a corrections official that taking a deep breath would mean the cyanide gas wouldn't bother her, to which she sort of brilliantly replied,
"How would you know?"
But her last words are the ones that really stick with you. Good people are always so sure they're right. The Salem witch trials were, to put it exceptionally mildly, not America's finest hour. Between February of 1692 and May of the next year, hundreds of people were accused of consorting with the devil, causing supernatural mayhem, and overall being whatever the opposite of peanut butter is to Puritanism's righteous chocolate.
What afflicts you?
A witch! A witch! A witch! A witch!
Sarah Good was one of the first unlucky ones. There were two cousins in Salem named Abigail Williams and Betty Paris, young women who wound up being, if their accusers were to be believed, two of the most bewitched and accursed human beings in history. While their peculiar behavior has in recent years been attributed to everything from epilepsy to bad wheat and even simply boredom, according to History of Massachusetts, it was blamed on witchcraft at the time, and the two put the blame specifically on three locals: a farmer named Sarah Osborne, a slave called Tituba, and Sarah Good. These would be the first three accusations in what would go on to be the Salem witch trials, a period of history synonymous with baseless claims and harsh, pointless punishments. Good, to her credit, was having precisely zero of it. Her last recorded words before being hanged were, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." How do we define a war crime? War, it's been remarked, is hell. It is by its very nature a series of atrocities committed chaotically in the pursuit, theoretically, of higher order, a safer world. It might even seem after a cursory glance the term war crime was invented by someone who never themselves saw war. Isn't the term itself almost redundant? Or at least that's probably how Harry Breaker Morant felt when he was sentenced to die for war crimes committed during the Second Boer War. What exactly did the Australian soldier do that brought him to his end? Like with so many other corners of history, Executed Today says it depends a lot on who you ask. Some people say he was carrying out an unwritten order from British higher-ups to take no prisoners. Others will tell you that after Morant's friend was captured and mutilated, he went on a revenge killing spree, taking out prisoners of war. Really, the one thing everyone can agree on is the intensity of his last words shouted at the firing squad.
"Shoot straight, you bastards! Don't make a mess of it!"
Billy Conn Gardner maintained until the end he was innocent of the crime for which he was put to death. In 1995, Billy Gardner was put to death by lethal injection for the murder of Thelma Catherine Rao, a cafeteria worker at a Texas high school. According to the New York Times, Gardner conspired with the husband of one of Rao's colleagues and broke into her office while she was counting money, stealing $1,600 and shooting Rao in the chest. Rao passed away from her injuries 11 days later. At the time, Gardner was on parole after having been charged with burglary and assault, among other things. While on death row, Gardner was in regular correspondence with an attorney out of Wisconsin who tried unsuccessfully to convince the courts of Billy's innocence. Billy Gardner's last words before being executed were, "I forgive all of you. Hope God forgives all of you too." Then his mother, sitting in observation, said, "I've never been more proud of you than I am now." According to Texas law, any participant in a fatal crime could be sentenced to death. That's how G.W. Green wound up executed for a crime he didn't commit. In November of 1976, Green and two accomplices broke into the home of John Denson, a juvenile probation officer for the county of Montgomery, in the hopes of stealing his gun collection. Denson and his family were held at gunpoint, and Denson lunged at one of the intruders. He was shot 3 times by Green's co-conspirator, Joseph Starvagi. Denson's wife and young daughter were told by Green and company to hide under a blanket during the time when Denson was shot. They later claimed that Green screamed at Starvagi to shoot the two of them, but Starvagi refused. In 1991, a stay of execution for Green was denied. Asked if he had any last words before being killed by lethal injection, he said, "Let's do it, man, lock and load." Then, as the drugs began to take hold, he muttered, "Ain't life a bitch?" Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more true crime grunge videos are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.